Howdy, everybody. Week 3. Welcome to the play sheet. The opening script, what if the Jacksonville Jaguars are good? So the Jaguars are 2-1, but the 2-1 feels a little bit weird. They lost to Washington, not a great team that they probably should have won that game. And then they beat the Colts, which was sick, 24-0, divisional rival, emphatic win. And then they chased it with another emphatic win, 38-10 against the Chargers. Of course, the Chargers and the Colts are both pretty banged up, so it can feel uncertain. Are the Jaguars actually good? Let's get into some numbers. The Jaguars are second in DVOA only to the Buffalo Bills. They're top 5 in both offensive and defensive DVOA, which makes them the only team in the league at that rank. It's a little early in the season to rely on DVOA. Sample size is kind of small. But if you look at Dave, which is like preseason adjusted DVOA, the Jaguars are 12th. So good. Let's go now to EPA per play. Top 10 in both categories. So that feels pretty good. By point differential, they're second in the league. By success rate, they're second on defense. There's no way to cut the Jaguars' season through 3 weeks and not come away thinking, team's pretty good. That feels like a surprise, but it also kind of isn't. Jacksonville was always going to get a lot better the second they got Urban Meyer out of the building. Urban Meyer was the Jaguars head coach for like 11 months and just his entire tenure was peppered with foible after misgiving, after mistake, after failure. The Jaguars were sending PR tweets from the team account 2 weeks into the season promising things were going to get better. It was that bad that quickly. Replacing Urban with Doug Pederson really makes the team better. Pederson was one of the best coaches in the league when he was with Philadelphia. Super Bowl winner, fourth down aggressiveness, great play calling, young quarterback development. Everything Jacksonville needed for a player like Trevor Lawrence. Remember, when the Jags drafted Lawrence first overall, 2021 NFL draft, this was the Golden Goose Man. This was Peyton Manning, Andrew Luck reincarnate. And he looked good in his rookie season, but the numbers didn't really bear it out because everything around him, Urban Meyer, was not good. The Jaguars' offensive line was poor. Schematically, they weren't doing anything interesting on offense, and the receivers were really lacking. Enter Christian Kirk and Zay Jones, the Jaguars' 2 leading receivers this year. Both free agent additions from general manager Trent Baalke. If Urban is the number 1 thing we made fun of the Jaguars for over the last 18 months, Trent's a close second. He made a lot of decisions that a lot of other general managers probably wouldn't have made. Baalke gave Kirk $72 million over 4 years, which basically like nuked the wide receiver market, and then he chased it with $27 million over 3 years for Zay Jones. A bunch of other kind of B-tier players, not super household names, got big money from the Jaguars in free agency. Foyesade Oluokun, Foley Fatukasi, Darius Williams, Evan Ingram. In March and in April, when our entire vision as a football-consuming media and public is on, is this team making good offseason moves? That wasn't great. But in September, it doesn't really matter how much money Foyesade Oluokun's making. It matters that the Jaguars are better because he's there. He was a better linebacker than they had previously. And that's true on all levels of the Jaguars team. So all of a sudden in Jacksonville, you have one of the best quarterback prospects in recent memory, playing behind a solid offensive roster. A first-year defensive coordinator, Mike Caldwell, seems like he knows his stuff with a pretty studded roster from defensive line to linebacker to corner and safety. And a head coach in Doug Pederson who knows how to put together championship seasons. He's a good quarterback developer, and critically, he's aggressive. The Jags have scored multiple touchdowns on 4th down just this season, including a 50-yard run from James Robinson against the Chargers in Week 3. Play the music, baby. Time for play action. 4th and 1. Ball on the 50, you're expecting quarterback sneak, something short yardage. Before we even run the play, we have to see how the Chargers matched personnel to the Jaguars. The Jaguars walked out in 13 personnel. That's 1 running back and 3 tight ends, all of which we can see on the left side of the offensive line. This is Pederson challenging Staley and saying, hey, I know you like to be in light personnel because the Chargers love to get extra defensive backs on the field. How are you going to match up against these 3 tight ends? Because the Jaguars didn't have to walk out in this formation. They could have had 3 tight ends on the field and they didn't shotgun, spread it out. And so the Chargers put 5 defensive backs on the field. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, and then there's a 5th cornerback way over there. That leaves the Chargers with just 3 down defensive linemen, 1, 2, 3, and 3 linebackers, 2 here on the outsides, and then 1 Drew Tranquill off the ball. Drew Tranquill is the player to watch here because he's got to try to fit this run if it comes in the interior gaps and make sure he stops the Jaguars before they gain a yard. From this formation, he might get zone, right? We're going to see all the offensive line move one direction. James Robinson will follow that flow, find a gap, stick his head in, go pick up a yard. Also from this formation with extra tight ends, we often get a run called duo, which looks like zone, but then isn't. You see a double team with these 2 offensive linemen. These 2 tight end would double team up to the linebacker, Kyle Van Noy, and Robinson will initially push front side and then work backside and run off those double teams. So watch Tranquill and the Chargers interior at the snap. The line is going to stunt because they want to try to gum up some of these gaps and confuse the blocks that the Jaguars are hitting. Tranquil, who's reading that offensive line, right now reads zone. He reads zone because the entire Jaguars offensive line is working one way, save for Brandon Scherf. This isn't zone, and it's not duo. It's meant to look like zone, but really it's going to end up with Scherf pulling way on the boundary, lead blocking for James Robinson. This ends up as like zone counter or zone windback. Basically, it's just Scherf and Robinson working off of him way on the left side of the formation, where all those defensive backs are lined up over the tight ends. So even as the Chargers stunt the line, and we can kind of see that interior moving a little bit, they're kind of coming across the line, trying to change which gaps they're in. Even as Tranquil steps down into that interior, worried about a zone run, we can see that Scherf and Robinson are already working to the boundary. Pederson's now challenging these Chargers defensive backs. Hey, you've got multiple double teams in front of you. You have flow coming your way. Fit the run. Defensive backs are not good at fitting the run. They don't like taking on pullers. They don't like making tackles against really big backs in tight spaces. So as Robinson works with Scherf into the boundary, we find that the Chargers have misfitted the run. It's Scherf v. Samuel one-on-one, which is like an insane advantage to the offense, and then nothing but green grass for Robinson. So the run was made easy both because the personnel that Doug got on the field challenged the Chargers to get heavy, and they didn't. And then because the run initially looked like zone. It looked like something Drew Tranquil knew and understood, and he stepped down to fit that run, only the run was never happening between the tackles. Good design, good execution, 6 points. Joining us from Jaguar Report, it's John Shipley. John, are the Jaguars good?
I mean, if you're simply using what we've seen in 2022, I mean, based on what good is right now in the NFL, I think unquestionably. I mean, yeah, they come with some caveats, but when you're, winning 2 games by combined 64-10 and no turnovers in that time, as opposed to, 5 takeaways, I think they've given up 0 sacks in the last 2 games. I mean, I think that's unquestionably good, at least for right now.
Urban versus Doug, is it just like the fog has been lifted?
Complete 180. Obviously, every time a team hires a new coach, they talk about the change in culture, and the cliches, at least in this event, actually real. I mean, this was players that, they were pretty tight, but they openly all hated, their head coach.
Yeah.
There was a common, mistrust, with players and, the head coach. I mean, a lot of these guys, young guys, I mean, just off the top of my head, because the Urban Meyer debacle, guys like DJ Chark, Laviska Shenault, James Robinson, they all had their careers, dramatically shifted because, they had the worst coach in NFL history. So I think a big thing about Pederson's first couple of months on the job was kind of winning that trust over, but I think he's definitely done that.
John Shipley, thank you for joining us. Time for Under Presser. Justin Herbert had a rib injury at the end of his week 2 game against the Chiefs. He looked horrible. He couldn't run, and then he would have an incredible throw, and he would wince and run, whatever, and it was bad. And for the entire week, it was kind of a question as to whether or not he would play. He ended up getting a injection and played against the Jaguars in week 3, but he didn't look great, and the Jaguars clowned the Chargers, and the Chargers were down by 28 points in the 4th quarter, and Justin Herbert was still playing. After the game, head coach Brandon Staley was asked about why.
He wanted to be out there with his teammates. He felt good, and he wanted to finish the game. He wanted to, give our group some energy, and we were going to protect him there at the end with really sound protection as best we could. But it was more about him wanting to finish with his guys.
He wanted to be out there with his teammates is not enough of a reason to play a guy, because that's every single dude on your roster, and you don't play all of those guys. You as a coach choose who to put out there to give you the best chance to win the football game, and that's why the decision to start Justin Herbert, even if he was banged up, was defensible, because Herbert gives you a really good chance to win a lot of football games. Once your win percentage is at 0 because you're down 4 scores in the 4th quarter, who you play is no longer a let's win football games decision. It's a let's win football games a week from now, a month from now, a year from now decision. You have to make a more responsible decision here, especially when you as a coach are so predicated on this idea of aggressiveness. You go for it on 4th downs, you're going for 2-point conversions, try to win the game. You're constantly making decisions that put you in the crosshairs of the NFL media, whether warranted or unwarranted. Staley as a coach gets a lot of visibility. This is just asking for more uncertainty. At some point, you're the head coach. At some point, you run the football team, and Staley's a young coach. He's not a very experienced coach, and it can be understandably tough to take on that role in moments like this, where you're going to disappoint a very important person in your life, Justin Herbert, and tell him to put his tuchus on the bench. But on the bench, his tuchus must go. There is nothing to be gained by playing Herbert in the 4th quarter. And I think Staley kind of gets that, given the way he talks about this, but you have to make the decision. All right, now time for a special part 2 of Under Presser, where we just watched the Ken Dorsey video.
They run out of time in the end, and the offensive coordinator, Dorsey.
Okay, and now I want to outro, and I want to do my Ken Dorsey slam, where this has got to be like here-ish. Ken Dorsey, baby. We're out.